So, welcome to the discussion topic. Today we are going to be looking at a quite interesting one for sure. We are going to be looking at realism versus rule of cool. What's a good balance, and when is it too far, and how to avoid extreme imbalance between the two. We're going to be looking at what is rule of cool, what is meant by realism in an RP sense, extremes on both ends, examples of points of contention, so fighters, mechs, shields, ship sizes, etc. What's a good balance between the two? Good indicators to tell if you're going too far in either direction, and knowing your setting and consistency. So first off, what's rule of cool? Well, it's pretty simple. It is literally just when you go, you know what, I'm kind of going to hand wave this particular issue. I just want it to be cool. You know, I want this because it's awesome to me. It's awesome for the setting, and in my opinion, it will contribute to the setting in a way that, you know, maybe not having it due to realism, you know, will be a detriment if we don't have it. So, rule of cool is pretty much used by everyone in a roleplay setting and even a writing setting, because there's just so many times you go, you know what, I want to do this because it's awesome. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I want to preface this a bit as well by saying that there's not really a case for realism versus rule of cool. It's all on a spectrum. And as anything, you can take it in moderation. And rule of cool is definitely one of those things where you can get a vast difference between the sort of like, oh, you know what, I'm just going to make this guy's shoulder pads look a bit different and, you know, a little bit wacky, even though it might not be quite nice in combat to use as a person. And my 50 million kilometre super ship that looks like some sort of angelic being is able to destroy universes and whatever purely because I say so, because I think it's personally awesome. You know, there's a bit of a difference between those different sides. But at the end of the day, it comes down to what you think is going to be good and what you're going to enjoy. And it can cover anything from how things work to how things look to just aspects of the setting that allow people to do things. So, realism in RP is not necessarily the opposite. Realism is pretty much as, well, self-explanatory, is how real you are willing to make something within that setting, and how realistic is it going to be. Now, again, it's a spectrum. It doesn't necessarily mean that everything is immediately going to be like crazy bonkers, oh my god, it has to be exactly like IRL. But it is very good to have realism in setting because it helps people get very much a grounded basis. If I tell you that my tank is very similar to a T-72B, real world example, you're kind of going to know what that is. You're kind of going to be like, okay, yeah, I can see how that functions. Or if I tell you this particular missile system is generally the same as a real-world Patriot anti-air system, and you can go, okay, because even if you don't exactly know what Patriot is, you can go, okay, it's a box that shoots missiles at planes. That is pretty much like the extent that you can go to. It helps you get grounded ideas of what something is, and of course there is a spectrum of that where you can go into, okay, well, this has to be like this because it needs to be realistic, it needs to make sense, it needs to be like this interaction has to be, you know, properly real, etc. And again, just sort of like rule of cool, there's slippery slopes for both sides that can really go and positively impact your setting, but also negatively impact your setting if you decide to slide one way or the other a bit too much in an environment that maybe isn't designed for that level. So this kind of comes into what extremes are there on both ends. Well, we'll start with realism and RP. So I'll use Ancerious as an example for this. So Ancerious is kind of a bit of a weird one. We we are soft RP, but we're also kind of hard at the same time. And it really does depend on what aspects that you look at the setting, because on the one hand, we have crazy people running around with magic in, like, angel ships. We have weird blob creatures. We've got crazy, cute, hive mind little girls, and whatnot. And then on the other, you have, like, ultra-specific ship designs. You have an entirely fleshed-out supersymmetric particle system for physics that's based off actual, like, real-life physics designs and takes into account actual particle spin and, like, charge and everything to figure out what those things do in a coloronic system, and then determine what materials that would then make and what the materials would then do. So we kind of have aspects from both ends of the realism spectrum. But honestly, at the end of the day, we kind of have it at a stage where, if it makes sense, if you can explain it to me and say, it is this, it can do this, therefore it's like X, I can go, alright, yeah, I can see that, that makes sense, approved. If it makes sense, if you can at least point me to things that it's kind of similar to or might be using, it doesn't even have to be like exact real life examples. You could say, oh well, you know, it would be like this from another IP setting or whatnot. As long as you're giving somebody grounded knowledge and examples, that could be a sense of realism, and that's what we like to have here. Of course, as I said, there are things that we like to have pretty high realism, but that's not for the setting as a whole. So we don't expect people to literally go out to our physics system and go, what's a chiral coloron? What's its charge? What's its spin? How can I combine it with a Mistralion and, like, create a new material which has exactly these properties? You know, we don't expect anyone to do that. If you want to do that, absolutely go for it. That would be awesome. But we don't expect people to do that because it would be absolutely crazy. What we would normally expect is for someone to go, I have an idea for a particular substance which is a really good supercapacitor, and I want it to be available for everyone, but I would like perhaps my nation to be a good producer of such. And then we can go, okay, what have we got in our setting that matches that? Well, Dawnstone or Halostone is kind of similar to that, so maybe you're a good producer of Halostone. Boom. Everyone, with the help of the new resources sheet, knows what that is. It's now grounded. Everyone knows its capabilities within the RP. It's now realistic for that RP sense. Of course, the absolute extreme for realism, you do find it in RP groups in the sci-fi sense, but it's typically more found in modern tech RP. It's when people start stat posting. Now, if you're thinking, well, what the hell does that mean? Stat or gear posting? So, stat and gear posting is when I will, you ask me, Myrick, what's your tank like? And instead of me just, like, giving you an image and a little lowdown on, like, oh, it's got, like, this gun, it's kind of fast, blah, 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 I go, well, my friends, and I post a 6-page essay with exact calculations on, here's its ground pressure, here's the exact material composites that its armour made out of, which can exactly stop 42 kilojoules of impact on, like, this particular oblique angle, and it has this, and its engine has you know, all of this output, and that allows it to do this, this, and this, and you go into such minute detail that everything is calculated. Now, if you're in a scenario where that is the case and everyone finds it fun, cool, awesome. But if you're not, that can really, 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 really detract from RP. Because the worst part is that if somebody has supposedly calculated out everything that they could possibly do, what happens if somebody then comes along and goes, well, actually, I've got something a bit different? Now they have to do all the calculations again. They might argue with you, going like, oh, well, actually it would probably stop that because within my spreadsheet Excel estimates, you'd be within these parameters. And it usually leads to people in role plays, like refusing to take damages or arguing over that you should take more damage from their 64 kilojoule railgun round that's impacting you at precisely max 6, and it has a tungsten tip, and it just gets so mind-bogglingly infuriating because it has nothing to do with the actual story. Once you get to the point with realism, where it starts detracting from the fun of the RP, that's when you have, in my opinion, overstepped that boundary. Now, you can stat post outside of RP all you want. You can have your own integrated stat system. And we've seen it done where people are like, oh, well, you know, I've got my own ratings for, like, armour and shields and weapons and stuff. That's cool. If you want to go in and do, like, all the calculations, you are more than welcome to. But when it starts getting to the point where somebody's RP post in a story setting is 4 paragraphs and only 2 sentences of that is actual response to, like, the actual story at hand, and the rest of it is describing their, like, soldiers' utility gear and weapon and caliber of weapon and how many rounds they have in their magazine and their extra combat knife and the exact output of their power armor's reactor and all of this other stuff. The moment you start throwing that into the RP, you are actively trying to kill that RP because it has nothing to do with your stats. So that's the kind of extremo. I knew a group which lived around that. And thankfully I only got to experience it for a few months before I left, and also before Google Communities died, but they based everything, and I mean everything, around hard stat calculations. So if you went into that group, you were expected to design your own starships from the ground up. They wanted thrust to mass ratio, they wanted exact fuel consumptions, they wanted the fuel that you carried, they wanted the exact output of your reactor, they wanted your weapons output, they wanted the exact details of how much your laser would ablate a specific armor value of a substance. They wanted GDP numbers, they wanted everything. And you're probably not going to be surprised when I say this, but it absolutely died, because nobody wants to come into a group and spend like 99% of their time stat posting and working out numbers. I mean, maybe people want to. If that's your thing, cool, awesome. But if it just is not good for RP, as I say. So yeah, that's the kind of end tier of realism when you're expected to design super hard sci-fi stuff where everything has to be in line with what we currently understand about physics, everything has to be calculated, ships all have to look usually the same way, there's no, you're stopped from using specific ideas because it doesn't fit within the realism of the setting and it doesn't make sense from a in-character economic or design standpoint. It's at that level where it gets to the extreme. And that's what we try to avoid here. So we like a good level of realism, but we like rule of cool. Now, the extremes for rule of cool, you probably already can work this out, is straight up hand waving. So, rule of cool is fine. Again, we have plenty of it in Ancerious. Holy hell, we have a lot of it in Ancerious. Just as much as we do realism. I mean, we've got, Sonics, Magic, FTL, crazy stuff. It's all good. But there is a limit. And it's all well and good if you want to go, that's actually an awesome idea, I'll just run with it. I know it has some weaknesses and problems, but we'll just go over, we'll just brush over that and just make it work. That's all cool. If you are in an RP with several other people and you all just go, that would be awesome, even if it isn't particularly realistic, do it. You're all going to have fun. awesome. As long as it's not obviously breaking the rules or constraints of the setting or consistency, but we'll go on to that later. But if it's going to be fun for all of you, awesome. But if it gets to a point where there are situations that it makes absolutely no sense for something to happen, but because it's cool, you run with it, and it does break the setting and all of this other bits, and it does make people go, that doesn't really make any sense. Like, for example, your character manages to dodge a laser pistol in a room. With that laser, that goes at the speed of light. You're not dodging that, even if you are some mega super soldier. So if somebody goes, "Oh, well, rule of cool, mate, I just dodge," like, really? I mean, that's at that point, that's not kind of like butting into realism. That's just like kind of from a balance standpoint. If your character can dodge actual laser bullets at the speed of light, well, then, like, how have they not immediately just won whatever fight that they're in, or, you know, resolved whatever situation? Because clearly they're pretty damn powerful, yo. And in the same regard, if you're going to design like crazy tanks that are absolutely massive and they've got 50 guns on them, and there looks like there's absolutely no way that they would reliably function in any combat situation, you have to again kind of go like, does that make sense? Like, can you use that in RP? There's always a bit of a limit where it kind of goes, it stops being cool and starts going into the realm of, no, that's kind of just dumb, or like trying to push. And of course you do get plenty of people who like to push the rule of cool aspect in order to get one up over another player. And as much as I hate to say this, magic is a big way, and psionics in RP, where people just kind of rule of cool it. Like, oh, well, my characters are magical. Oh, well, my characters have psionics. So, you know, rule of cool, I have mega powers and I can do all of this stuff. It gets to the point where if there's nothing that you can reliably use to back up your stuff, in a, say, you know, you're in an RP with someone and there's a disagreement. Me and you have come to a point where you are trying to do something against something of mine. And I'm like, well, okay, I have X thing, and it can do this thing, and these are its capabilities. And I'm like, what can you do? And you say, oh, well, I can do this and this and this. Okay, well, where is that written down? Where has that been established? Oh, well, you know, kind of hasn't, like, rule of cool, you know, my thing looks awesome, I just want it to do this thing. It's like, well, then why should I suffer because you haven't established consistency with your designs, or why should I suffer because you just want to have a cool moment? If it's a cool moment of you absolutely dabbing on me, well, that's not fun for me. It might be, I mean, you know, there's plenty of instances in Ancerious where people have got absolutely dabbed on and had loads of fun, but it's the whole concept of, if you're having a fun moment at the expense of someone else, you're being a dick. RP is cooperative writing. You're both supposed to have fun. Now, if you both agree to that and somebody dabs on you with a rule or cool thing, awesome. As long as, again, it doesn't break the setting and break the rules, then awesome. But if somebody's like, no, I don't like that, well, then it should be looked into by, you know, you or another, like, member of the group or admins or whatever, and they should step in and rectify the situation. We have had plenty of instances where we've had players come in with specific things that essentially are 100% rule of cool, with absolutely no basis in reality, with absolutely no basis of consistency, and just pull stuff out of their ass. And it's ruined roleplay, and it ruined the setting at one point. I hear Crag is back. Do you wish to elaborate on this situation? Or not? Okie dokie.
This is the
Solvex.
Oh, okay.
The ultimate rule of cool hand wave.
So Sovx is an extreme example of when you try to. The creator of Sovx, Frim/Joby, tried to excuse it as a reasonable material based in like freedom of creation as a sandbox group, but with Ancerious being a sandbox group, that is. But fundamentally, it was a rule of cool hand wave that was a master of all trades with very intangible, never used weaknesses, and is a particularly extreme example of what not to do when trying to create a rule of cool material or anything.
Yeah. So that, so Sovix was actually the reason why we implemented the whole, like, unified materials, rare crystals, and particle system. Because the guy had this particle/substance that could literally do everything. And anything that he wanted. And the problem is that it was so inconsistent, and that it changed on the fly, that it just completely broke all sense of belief. So, yeah, it's kind of those things where, again, rule of cool's great, but just don't go too far. Just because you might think, oh, well, it's going to be really cool to do this idea, if it is so wacky that it doesn't fit into, like, I guess, established parameters, it's going to be pretty hard to do. I mean, sure, you can scream freedom of creation, but it didn't work that time, and it's probably not going to work in the future, depending on where you are. But those are, I guess, the two, like, major extremes, which is ultra stat posting, hard realism calculation. It all has to be to exact specifications, and I can do anything I want, and I'm going to do it on the fly. You can't stop me because it's really cool. Those are the two extremes, I would say. But while in an open setting, for the most part, hard and soft sci-fi could usually interact. But there is always several points of contention that come up. And they always come up. In every group I've ever been in, the same points always come up. Fighters, mechs, ship sizes, shields, and supernatural stuff. So, we'll go with the first one. And I'm not going to say that anyone's right or wrong here, for the most part. Now, it all depends on setting. But fighters, for the most part, in Ancerious at least, should be available. They're fun. Everyone loves fighters. They love zooming around, doing ace combat RPs, etc. Blah, 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 blah. Now, fighters in Ancerious and Attackcraft in general have a very interesting relationship. Because we've had people who are like, no fighters whatsoever, get rid of them, fighters are crap, they should never be used in any example ever, they would instantly get deleted by ship-based weapons, point defense, whatever, and just annihilated from the face of reality so nobody would ever build them. That's also a common thing that you will see on many other groups. You also have the other extreme side of that spectrum, where people are like, oh, well, my Gundam / Star Wars X-Wing mobile suit, whatever, is going to fly through the void at 10 billion miles per second, completely dodge a 10 gazillion ship fleet's worth of barrage, and then just single-handedly annihilate them with a massive oversized AK-47. So, it's kind of the case of, you've got these two pretty hard entrenched camps that are both at each other's throats. Now in Ancerious, I guess both are true, because on the one hand, if you decide to throw your fighters towards an enemy fleet without doing anything to try and cover them, they're going to get absolutely deleted by point defense within 0.5 seconds. That's just how that's just going to happen. But if you cover your fighters with ECM countermeasures, decoys, use long-range missile attacks, coordinate with your fleet to give them covering fire, attack picked off elements or whatnot, or attack certain targets, you are going to get your fighters within pretty close of the enemy ships, and you're going to be able to, engage them or do attack runs or whatever and hit critical systems, if you're lucky. So, here, it's kind of a middle ground. Fighters are extremely useful, but they're not the be-all and end-all, and they're not going to instantly win you all shit fights ever, like in Gundam series and Star Wars. So we have a nice balance there, but we also have our own twist on that, where we work in Alcubierre bubbles, like warp bubbles, where you can launch fighters to go and intercept enemy fleets in FTL. And you can pop their warp bubble or FTL bubble and bring them out of FTL, bog them down, engage them, etc. Think of it like sorting craft that basically just go out and intercept enemy fleets to buy you more time. We just have interesting things that we've decided to add to that. So, if anything, fighters are actually pretty damn good in this group. But you will always see the whole thing of, no fighters versus Star Wars, Gundam, meme everything, small attack craft. The key is, and this is going to be the same with all of these, do it in a way that allows players to use said weapons or whatever, but in a way to enjoy them. Make them balanced in the setting. Allow them to be used. Make it so that they're not particularly overpowered, but they're a tool in a box that people can use in particular battle situations, and in a way that they get to use and enjoy them. Again, the next part, mechs. And from a realism standpoint, mechs are awful. You would never in any situation choose a mech over a tank. Ever. In any situation. But everyone wants to use mechs because they look absolutely kick-ass awesome. End of story. So, on the one hand, again, you have people who are like, no mechs ever. And then on the other hand, you've got people who are like, damn, I'm going to use mechs for all of my fighters and, tanks and everything because they look cool. In Ancerious, you've got people who use mechs, you've got people who use tanks, and you've got people who use both. And they have faced off on the battlefield multiple times. Again, as long as nobody is expecting them to be all end all, is going to delete absolutely everything before them in a Gundam fight where, one mobile suit goes out and annihilates 26,000 divisions in one go, or, as long as the other side doesn't expect one T-72 rip-off battle tank to go out and destroy 64 gajillion mechs in one go, then it's going to be okay. As long as both of you are on the same side of, oh, we want to have fun with this, it's all good. So, we pretty much have the whole thing of, you can use mechs if you want. They're not going to be the be-all, end-all, but we're not going to expect them to be literally the worst thing that's ever existed either. So it's all about finding the balance that makes people happy and allows people to use those controversial topics, but not in a way that's going to break the setting. The next one is shields. Now, you've got the shield purists who are, oh, my Star Trek shields / Star Wars shields, oh, you've shot me for 26 turns in a row, and my shields are down to 98%. Holy shit, the tension. And then you've also got the whole side where shields don't exist. They never will exist. They're a crutch. Now, both sides are pretty cancerous, just like with everything else, and it's all about finding a good balance. In Ancerious, shields are treated as active defense. There's no such thing as bubble shields. They do not defend against everything fired at them, and it is just like an armour. You have multiple layers of usually different systems that defend against different weapons in different situations, and they do it on an active intercept basis. So you have, like a big protection onion, essentially. So you have plasma shields that are going to be good against, laser weapons and such. And you have particulate shields that are also going to be good against kinetics. And they will deploy those shields as and when incoming fire hits them. And occasionally your shield might get overwhelmed and shots are going to come through it and destroy you. That's fair. Now we have it in a system where shields are not overpowered and you can't, break through them and people are just going to be hammering away at you for 3 turns while you just take no damage. But at the same time, you're also not going to have a situation where if anyone says, I use shields, they're just going to get absolutely lynched and burnt at the stake. So, again, we found a nice common middle ground where everyone can pretty much, like, go and do what they want in regards to those. Next one is ship sizes. This is always a good one to bring up in any sci-fi community. You bring up how big are ship sizes here, and then you watch the obscene aggression that comes out from people, where you have some people who are absolutely religiously convinced that all ships ever will be under a kilometre in size, and then you've also got the other people on the other side who are like, oh my god, my 46 AU megacock is like gonna completely delete the solar system. And again, it's just sort of one of those things where this is a spectrum topic where it's all about finding a good balance that works for everyone and working it into a setting. I know that I keep repeating that, but that really is pretty much the TLDR of this conversation. So, again, you've got on the one hand these people that think ships are going to be absolutely teeny, 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 tiny, when in reality they wouldn't, because they need massive reactors, they need fuel, they need hydroponics, they need the ability to at least somewhat mechanically repair themselves, they've got to have ammunition, weapons, shield generators, hangar capacity, etc. But then on the other hand, you've got people running around with like 300-kilometre ships, where it's like, okay, but what are you doing with 96% of all of your internal space? Because it's empty. And it says on your stat card that you only have a crew of 10,000 people who are all probably sit in the same mess hall whenever it comes to lunch. So, yeah, it's just a bit of like a meme. And again, realism and rule of cool comes and goes with that. If you want to have people who are running around with 100-kilometre ships with these mega big dick cannons and they want to do it with rule of cool, awesome. If you want to have people that are running around with tiny little sort of, Mass Effect, Normandy-esque ships that are flying under the radar, really manoeuvrable, etc. and sleek, awesome. Again, rule of cool. In Ancerious, honestly, ship size doesn't really count for anything anymore. We did have a period where everyone just absolutely size-wanked and had a go at each other over it, but now it's pretty much a case where, I mean, you can have like a 3-kilometre ship fight like a 70-kilometre ship and nobody's really going to care about the size, unless it really comes down to it. But, as long as you say, I have a ship, and the other person says, I have a ship, and you just start shooting each other, generally it's going to be a good time. So, there's that. And then the other one is psionics and magic. And this is always a massive point of contention because there are some communities who will absolutely ban you at the moment you mention any sort of supernatural powers. And then there are other communities who have magic users and psionic users running around rampant with leaders of their nations who can just mind and annihilate anyone who comes into contact, or have magical ships that can just pull whatever they want out of their asshole because there's absolutely no consistency in their writing and thus their entire nation is a handwave. So, yep, again, just finding a good way to make it all work. In Ancerious, we've designed an entire psionic system, which actually makes it into quite a realistic, setting with physics. And then we also implemented magic, but we've implemented magic in a way that regardless of what magic system you use, it's all going to be using the same sort of foundational set piece, so there's always going to be limits. So even if you have a completely different magic system to the guy next to you in the chat, you two are still going to have, at the very least, the same fundamentals. And that allows you to then balance off of that, and it interacts with the rest of the setting. As I have always said, a very good rule to have with magic and psionics and technology is neither, none of them, are any better over the other. And the reason for that is that the moment you start having magic that could completely and utterly eclipse technology, or psionics that can eclipse either of those, or if technology is going to eclipse the other two, well then nobody is going to use any of the others. Why would I, in a group where people can just magic stuff out of their ass, why would I ever use technology? Because I'm gimping myself. Or why would I, in a setting that has incredibly advanced technology, ever use magic if magic is just going to be a gimp version of technology? So it's all about making it actually work within the setting and for players who want to use it. So, yeah. Like, that's pretty much that subject. Kind of links in well to, like, finding a good balance between the two. As I said, at the end of the day, if somebody wants to use an idea that is pretty out there, or might not necessarily fit with the setting that you're going for, try to incorporate it. Don't just go, nah, it doesn't work. Nah, shit. Don't do that. Try to go, okay, how would that fit into the setting in a way that players can use it if they think it's awesome, but also fit it into a setting that is balanced and isn't just going to completely throw off the entire vibe of, the setting. If you're running a ultra-realistic sci-fi RP group and somebody wants to bring in magic, okay, it's fair enough to go, no. But if you're running a really open, soft sci-fi roleplay group like Ancerious, and somebody says, I want to use magic, yeah, cool. I mean, we've got, as I said, like, crazy hive mind little girls and massive planetoid people running around and crazy jet fighter people that fly around at, like, the speed of light. So magic's not really out of place if you really think long and hard about it. So yeah, it's one of those things where you want to find a good middle ground between any of the concepts, make it balanced, make it accessible to people who wish to use it, and make it so that it is not overly either one to rule of cool or realism. You don't want something to have to be a case of, oh, well, this is a bit OP, so in order to use it, you have to write up a 46-page stat post of how exactly your faction can conjure up the precise energy requirements of a star to power this magical siphon or whatever. But at the same time, you don't just want to go, I have tech, it does this. How does it do this? It also does this as well, okay, but how? And where did that come from? It's just awesome. Well, you want to get rid of that as well. So, try to avoid the extremes and find the balance in what's fun for you, what works for the setting, and what's balanced. That is what to go for. When in doubt, those three principles. Just, if it goes over any of those lines, if something is not balanced, if it's not fun, or if it doesn't fit, throw it or modify it. That's pretty much what it comes to. You will see a lot in Ancerious, especially in Gen Dev. Well, all of them. There are multiple topics where people go, does this idea fit? Does this work? And people go, I'm not sure. Or, yeah, it does because it can fit in with this. Or, maybe no, but there could be a way to fit it in. We will always try to find a way to make a concept work. If it doesn't work, we'll let you know. But if it can be made to work, we will, try to actually, make it work. But yeah, so the next part for sort of good indicators to tell if you're going a little bit too far in one of those directions. So, as I said, those three sort of principles work. Is it still fun for other people? If you are creating something, say you have a faction or anything within that faction, is it interacting with other people still fun for them? Now, it's all well and good if I spend ages writing up this really intricately done ship specification or tank specification or super realistic nation that interacts in hyper realistic ways. Is it fun if someone then has to interact with them, but then they have to essentially do the same thing that I've done, where they're forced to act in a specific way so that it's realistic and fits with my area? Because if it's not, you're just not that's not going to be fun for them. And if they're not having fun, they're not going to want to RP with you again. And if people don't want to RP with you again, then you're not going to be able to RP. So that is really not only detrimental to other people, but it's detrimental to yourself in the long run, and it will very quickly alienate you. Again, if you are making something and you think to yourself, does it fit in this setting? And if your immediate response is not really, and you have a hard time thinking how to fit it into that setting, it's probably a bit too out there. Now, Crag here can definitely sort of back me up when I say this, but back when Ancerious was in its infancy, a lot of people during the first Ancerious War pulled concepts out of their ass that did not in any way mesh with their nations or the setting concept or anything like that. But they pulled them out of their ass purely to try and combat other players or to at least give themselves an advantage. One of the things that was most, like, at least on for me, egregious, was the Union suddenly getting armoured core mechs out of nowhere. That was one of the things that really didn't make sense, and I've since removed that because it didn't make sense. Go on, Dan. I can tell you wanna get a little bit of input there.
Well, if anything, again, this is a bit of a spectrum, and even in a bad situation, like, there are respectable things that can be done. But with the first Ancerious War, where Overlord and Henry and Dylan and Sheaths, and they were all just playing off of each other and ripping off this or that, or just bringing up time travel to make their ships invincible. There was very little that actually could be salvaged from that situation. There were a couple of cool plays, like there was a situation with the briefcase armies. Myrick might remember.
Yeah, it was actually pretty cool.
I thought it was cool as fuck. Understandably, it pissed people off, but I thought it was a great in character use of a tool that they were given that wasn't intended at all to be used that way.
So I'll quickly explain to these guys. So bit of a like explanation. Sheaths was a super heavy magic faction. Now, to his credit, the guy who played it gave them some absolutely fantastic restrictions and consistency, which we'll get to in a bit. But he gave a glyph, like a special, I guess, magic imbuement to the Immortal Empire for being able to compress a large amount of things into a small space. Now, the Immortal Empire used this in a really awesome fashion that made so many people angry, which was understandable. But he pretty much created mock-ups of Tenebraean cities, alright, which is the guy he was at war at. And he put all of his soldiers on street corners, on strong points, etc. And then he had these, like, glyphs, compressed them, all these soldiers set up in these positions, into a suitcase. He then sent a load of business people into Tenebrae with these suitcases, put them into position, opened the suitcases, activated it, and suddenly he had an army in every city that controlled every strong point and every major thoroughfare and piece of infrastructure. It was absolutely brilliant. Of course, it was godmoddy to absolute hell, and you have no idea the amount of salt and anger that caused. But the concept...
But the problem is that we had approved this glyph that had been given to him beforehand.
Yeah.
So it was within the bounds of the group at the time. It was this amazing play that no one comprehended before the fact. And that's something, like, working within the rules given to you. If there's precedent, you can do ridiculous stuff. Preferably, it would have been the modern type of Ancerious environment where they were working together to tell cool stories. And maybe that would be looked at as a positive set piece in group history. But as it stands, it was a godmoddy, ridiculously problematic situation that needed to be rectified. But if something like that were to come up in the future and was discussed beforehand and brought up and discussed and developed and like everyone involved agreed, that could be something that could happen if something to permit that, like a catalyst, existed. You can do cool set pieces because we are here to tell good stories.
Damn right. And it's sort of those indications where if you have a concept like that that's really out there and wacky, but uses established, consistent canon stuff to get there, don't do what he did in those days, which was just, oh, we're just going about group business. Oh, Overlord posted a journal. Oh my god. And then just, like, 4 months of just anger. Instead, you would then come forward and go, hey, I've got this really wacky idea in GenDev, and you would discuss it with the person that you're supposed to be fighting. They would go, you know, that's pretty cool, let's do that, and then everyone would be cool with it, and all good, and suddenly everyone's having fun. That's awesome. But if you come up with a wacky, crazy concept that's very rule of cool, or, on the flip side, is ultra-realistic based on what you know with the setting, which is what the Suitcase Armies was, and you pull it out of nowhere, and it seems like a massive, like, you know, it's technically allowed within the rules, but it completely and utterly annihilates a story arc, just, you know, with a sudden out of nowhere event, that's going to cause a lot of issues, and that's the point where you go, okay, I should have talked to someone about this, rather than just, I'm going to, you know, spring it on everyone and it could be a big surprise. So, any time where you have these sort of ideas that are super rule of cool or super realistic, if at any point you think to yourself, man, this is going to give me this like huge, massive advantage in like a particular example, but you choose not to really discuss that or bring it up, and then you spring it on somebody later, it could be really dickish, because as you could kind of get a bit from the first Ancerious war, back in those days, Ancerious was a very different place, and it was pretty damn toxic for like the whole actual wars and stuff, because it wasn't like it is now where everyone talks to each other about like, hey, we have this idea, blah 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 blah, let's fight it and both have fun together. It was more of a case of one day you woke up, read a journal on DeviantArt, and suddenly one of your capitals is gone, sort of deal, because somebody has just pulled a super weapon out of nowhere that they have barely written about and was mentioned once in a journal like 15 days ago. So anything that's basically like, oh, this could be seen as super competitive in a setting, it is not worth, it's not worth the fallout, essentially. It's not worth alienating other people and screwing with the setting just to try and like one-upmanship. Another example of this is the sort of like the FTL weapon abuses, where we had to make interdiction mandatory, because technically it's extremely realistic if you have the ability to teleport a missile into an opponent's ship's critical systems. Why would you never do that? Like, why would I ever turn up to a battle and engage someone conventionally when I could just teleport 60 missiles straight from my missile silo using an FTL drive straight into your reactor, your bridge, and your like engines, and completely annihilate your ship within like 6 seconds? Why would I ever do anything else? And it completely killed the meta of the group, and suddenly everyone was like, oh, we got to use FTL weapons, holy shit, and like it just completely derailed and destroyed the story. Hence, we had to implement interdiction as standard, because while it was technically allowed in the rules, there was nothing to say you can't spam FTL weapons. It was basically being a dick within the whole loophole of like, oh, well, you know, technically it's allowed, therefore it's fine, you can't punish me for it, sort of deal. And it turned into a massive shitfest, as you can imagine. So, yeah, when you have any of the ideas that rule of cool or realism within a setting, please don't try to loophole them to get a competitive advantage. We're all here to have fun. We're all here to cooperatively write. and it's just not worth alienating yourself just to try and stroke your own ego or get a one-upmanship on someone else, because there's no point. We're all here to write Spaceman. Just enjoy yourself and let the other person enjoy it as well, you know? So that kind of leads into the last segment, which is knowing your setting and consistency. And this is the key thing. If you are going rule of cool, yeah, and coming up with these wacky concepts that aren't necessarily, you know, based in any realism whatsoever, especially on the magic and psionic side of things, as long as you are not violating the established rules and canon and, I guess, like, setting, then it's okay. And as long as you're consistent. If someone here, say, I don't know, Canis here with his Isoterran faction, yeah, they have magic. Now, me and him have several RPs in a row where I fight him, and he uses some like magical death beam on me, and it does exactly X effect. Now, if that stays the same for all those RPs, that's cool. I'm not going to have any dispute with that death beam. That's no different from a gamma laser, which I know I know that the gamma laser is going to irradiate and kill my crew, and I also know that X death beam is going to kill the souls of my crew. Both of them target my crew, kind of the same thing. It's consistent, yeah? But if in the fourth RP, they suddenly start affecting my ship's electronics, or affecting the hull of my ship, no, that's not how that works. I'm going to call that out, because suddenly a weapon that has been extremely consistent suddenly isn't, because of magic. Or, you know, if you have a set scion in your nation, like you've got scions in your nation, you could use psionic powers, and you've established that they can only really affect up to a certain point, and you consistently show that in every RP, people are not going to have a problem with you, because you have consistently shown their capabilities, and they know when they interact with them, those are the capabilities that they're going to have. If you then pull out of your ass that scion suddenly soloing an entire ship, or like doing some crazy shit out of nowhere, people are going to call you out on that, and it's not going to be a good look. But if you build up in story that this particular scion might be special, and there's something different, and that's been done over several RPs, then people aren't going to have a problem when that scion solos a ship, because you built it up, and you've given a consistent reason within the setting of why that scion is above and beyond the normal consistency and capabilities of your average scions. So if you are going full rule of cool, as long as you set a good consistency across the board of what those things can do, in still being really awesome and in how you want to run them, and they work within the setting, it's cool. There's nothing wrong with that. And that's how we roll here. If your awesome rule of cool idea can work within the setting, is consistent, and, you know, conforms to all of our rules and whatnot, and you give us a reason as to why it can work, you could do it, no problem. That's literally what half of the crazy meme ideas that we have running around the galaxy at the moment. Like, you know, as long as it works, awesome. As long as you can consistently make it work, awesome. And it's kind of along the same lines of the realism, because you get super hard sci-fi people, say, coming to a group like Ancerious, and they're like, well, I want to calculate all of this and that and the other. And it's kind of like, well, that's not really how we do things here. It's not going to mesh well if somebody comes into the group, not naming any names, and starts talking about the nanosecond reaction times of his super soldiers, and then claiming that it's going to make all the difference in these particular engagements, blah, 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 when in reality, if me and Crag here have a fight between our super soldiers, we're never going to once mention their reaction times. We're just going to have an awesome shootout or close combat fight on a ship bridge somewhere, ALA Revenge of the Sith style, and it's going to be awesome. But if somebody's going to come in and they're going to be trying to input stats into everything, it's not going to mesh well with the environment. So you need to learn the setting when you enter it. It's in the same regard as I'm not going to enter a super hard sci-fi community and go, right guys, I'm playing Spelljammer-esque super magical people who run around on rowing boats in space with catapults and ballistas firing magical energy at people. That's not going to go down too well. But, you know, it's always, you've got to learn the setting when you join it, and you've always got to figure out what works within that setting. And you've always got to be consistent. Consistency, honest to God, is possibly one of the most important things in roleplay and writing that you could possibly do. Because there is nothing worse than a massive plot hole where a really consistent thing that's been built up suddenly does something different. Which then opens up a plot hole earlier in time when it's like, why didn't it do that before? AKA, as somebody pointed out in the chat earlier, holdo maneuver. You have a scene which is super rule of cool because it looks awesome, literally breaks the entirety of Star Wars, because why didn't they do that to Death Star and the Executors and the Star Destroyers and literally everything else that they've ever designed in that entire setting? Why wouldn't you do anything other than hyperspace ram with extremely cheap droid ships? So, yeah, it's one of those things where know the setting, keep everything consistent, and just have fun. Just rule the cool. Have fun. Make it realistic. Have fun. Doesn't matter. Do what you want to do. At the end of the day, it's all about finding a good balance between the two and just having fun with everyone available in a hopefully non-competitive, non-rage fest kind of way. But that's pretty much all I have to say on the topic. I know that's not exactly anything like, haha, realism's right, or haha, rule of cool is right, but it is all about finding a good old balance. So, if anyone... Oh, go on, Greg.
And this discussion is in the context of Ancerious. That if there is a group that is tailored for a particular type of setting, you want to stay to that setting. You don't want to take what we've said here today and bring it to, like, the colonists or to Rise of Fate or to anything else and be like, actually the Ancerious admin said this. And we're not the word on these things. You want to be appropriate to the setting, and Ancerious in particular is a place for everyone to be able to, like, mesh all of these different types of approaches to sci-fi fantasy and have them all work together. So like, trying to find your balance between rule of cool and realistic is how you're going to want to do it in Ancerious. But there might be RPs here that are super serious. There might be RPs here that are just balls out fucking obscene. Just, you want to find what's appropriate for the situation at hand. And if you ever go out writing your own story, write what tells the story you want to tell.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the kind of group where you find a hive mind of 9-year-old girls fighting in a desert against Space Singapore. I mean, if that doesn't tell you what this group's about, I don't know what will. If you could do that, I'm pretty sure you can do anything, mate, in this group. So yeah, as long as it's not time travel. We've been there, we've done that, never again.
Time travel's banned.
Time travel's banned.
You get instantly killed.
Yeah, you instantly explode if you ever use time travel. Black holes is an interesting one. So black holes for this setting, you cannot use as a direct weapon. You can, however, use them for power generation. So, with all those main topics out of the way, does anyone have any questions? Be that specific or otherwise? Okay, so Stephen A says, so yeah, you want to minimise the surprise with the people that you're writing with and surprise the audience. Yeah, pretty much it's the case of, say for example, me and Crag are having a war, alright? And I have some super secret slot 1 stealth super weapon that I want to suddenly pounce in and blow up a really key planet that he has, right? Now, I could write a post or a journal out of nowhere and just blow up his planet. But that's God modding. He wouldn't have any way to then respond to that unless it was an RP. What's better is if I talk to Crag and say, hey, can I potentially blow up your planet with the stealth super weapon? We can have a really interesting situation, perhaps, where the super weapon goes in, blows up the planet, kills like the government or whatever, but then gets pinned down by a load of system defense forces, and we have a Hunt for Red October situation where the super weapon gets eventually destroyed. And then, you know, Dan's probably going to be like, awesome, that's much more like fair and balanced. And then, you know,
my capital got blown up.
Yeah.
Leave the group.
or he's going to have a massive rage fit and tell me to, you know, eat shit and die. So it's a 50-50. But anyway, so, and then...
to the question in that is that, does that conversation between me and my opponent have to be in a public space where everyone can see it, or can we both do it in like a DM and then surprise, and then do it in an RP to add that surprise to whoever wants to watch, whoever is watching?
You can absolutely do it in DMs, but I would say if it's a move that you're like, is this sort of like, I guess, legal or not, or does it make sense? You could always add an admin to DMs and be like, yo, does this make sense? Does this work? And then if so, then yeah, you just keep that in DMs, then you pull it in RP. A common thing that is done is me and Swingfire like to pull some pretty crazy shit, in particular RPs, where we talk about it in DMs and then we pull it and then people go like, what do you mean so-and-so character is now a part of the Panopticon? But anyway, so yeah, like, that's completely fine. If you want to do it openly, that's also fine, but if you want to do it in DMs, perfectly legitimate. Yeah, as long as it doesn't like break any particular rules, in which case just let somebody know. Any other particular questionerinos? And no, you can't use black holes as a super weapon. At least, not directly as the weapon. You can, however, use them as a power supply.
Exactly.
AKA the Crucible, which directed a section of an accretion disk and then fired it at a system star and caused it to go nova. Which also made quite a few people butthurt, but that is a story for another day. But yeah, pretty much anything like in RP that's going to be rule of cool or realistic, does it have a counter? Is this action or weapon or whatever used in such a way that the other person is not going to have a chance to respond? Because if you pull something that somebody can't respond to, that's pretty much forcing them into a situation where they have to, like, get fucked, essentially. And that's not going to be fun for them, and that's going to be coming across as you trying to either godmod or railroad. So you always want to have a situation where the other person can respond to such. Now, if they want to let it happen, cool. If they're going to suddenly pull something out of their ass to stop it, which is also highly questionable, you can then get an admin involved and, you know, you can work something out. But there always needs to be some sort of way to sort of respond, whether it's realistic or you're doing a rule of cool action. Again, if your partner is all cool and you've discussed it with them, awesome. Never mind. I mean, Jesus Christ, like, some of us old guard can literally god mod each other, like, you know, as much as we like, and we don't have a problem with it. In fact, like, half the RPs that we're in, at least the IGM, I'm like, hey, these guys are a bunch of grunts, go ham, write damages on them, have fun, you know? But you've got to trust the people that you RP with to do that. You need to know that they're not going to be like, I click my fingers and everyone dies. Like, you know, you need to trust them to be able to write them fighting such enemies, but in a way that is also going to be, like, interesting, and they're going to take damages and whatnot, so. So yeah. And don't do anything that's like, oh, I rule of cool, ignore all damages. That's never a fun one either. Especially when somebody tries to pull in magical religious stuff for their faction to do that. Nice, that's pretty cool. That's actually pretty rule of cool. If your faction's going to get screwed over by its own honor code, then awesome. All the power to you. Any rule of cool action that's awesome and subsequently makes your faction or something that you have eat shit and explode in some way, or like get absolutely screwed in a really awesome manner, that's like 100 points to Gryffindor. That typically gets you in really good graces with everyone. I know I've already covered this in another discussion, but the more you take damage and the more that you're really cool about taking losses, losing spectacularly, people are going to love you and want to RP with you. Not because they want to beat you, but because they know that they can trust you. That if you do pull something realistic or rule of cool out, it's going to be awesome and you're both going to have fun. And if they do try to RP with you just so that they can, overrun you, then you call them out as being an asshole and get the admins involved. Oh, that is a very good point, Blue. So Blue says, actually, you know what, Blue, just unmute yourself and talk about it.
Okay, well, I was going to mention, I'm not sure if it's been brought up, but I think rule of cool and sort of being realistic in conversation also sort of comes into dialogue and conversation. I assume that everyone sort of talks about battles and tech and all that kind of thing, but I think there's a very delicate balance in trying to make your dialogue as focused on the narrative and the story as possible and making as realistic reaction as possible. And if you swing one way or the other, it comes off as really cringy. Like if you're like a character's about to die or whatever, and he's like, "Oh, I want him in the last stand." He's like, he slashes through his enemies with merciless, like, sleekness and like complete effortlessness as he takes bullets from left and right, and he goes, "I will gladly lay down my life for the Bing Bong Empire," and it's like that. You're just trying to go so much into coolness that you're not realizing that's not how any living thing reacts to being shot or killed or something like that. And if someone's reading that, sure, you might feel like, oh, it's so good for my empire and all that, and oh, it's such a glorious death for this character I've built up for so long. But someone who's reading that from the outside, who maybe has only seen this person for an RP or whatever, or is just seeing this person as like a normal person without this context of, oh, it's a great empire, I've been working on this character for 3 RP arcs, it just comes off as really cringy. So the only thing I can remedy to work out another classic example I'll give to that is arguments. In real life arguments or whatever, you'll see that everyone constantly interrupts each other. It's in any conversation. Everyone wants to talk about themselves. Everyone wants to talk about what's going on with my life or whatever. And in conversations, in arguments, no one ever gives the chance for the other person to actually make their points. They interrupt and like, no, that's wrong, and all that kind of stuff. Exactly. It's like,
of course not.
So but on the other side, if you look at any drama series or whatever, in an argument, they'll have some interruptions, and then someone go, "What did you ever think about what it have effect on me?" And the other person just shuts up, and he goes, "I've lived for 6 months having to do this. I've sacrificed everything," and the other person just gives up and lets this monologue and like all of that, which is equally unrealistic. And if anyone's like looking at that, they're like, why would anyone just sit there if they disagree and just let this person like dominate the conversation? Both should be taken into account, because obviously, like I said, you need to fit this story and try and make it a bit cool and all that kind of stuff. Like, oh, this is my opportunity to talk about how my empire suffered and all that. At the same time, you don't want it to just be this cold dialogue about, oh, in 68 AME, my faction took an attack from this place, and you dare stand against me? I know I'm going on a bit of a waffle here, but the only thing I can suggest to find this cool middle ground between making it natural and simultaneously sort of cool is just look at, like, search up on YouTube or whatever conversation examples just of people talking. Like, there'll be English sorts of stuff, like in English lessons and all that kind of thing, of just random people talking in just a normal context. And just not listen to the subjects they're talking about necessarily, but their conversational patterns and things like that. And it should help work out how people try and make a dialogue going. And I know I'm not being very helpful. I'm just sort of saying, oh, don't be too cool, don't be too cold. But it's something to always keep in mind if you've just done a post, you've written it up, look back and see, would a person actually say this? Would a person say, like, all that kind of stuff? Or just say it out to yourself sometimes can help. Is that sentence so long-winded that it doesn't make sense? It's all that kind of stuff. Sometimes add in a stutter or something. But yeah, I'm getting very long-winded. I'm sure Mike didn't expect me to go on a 10-minute tangent.
No,
yeah.
That's fine. Like, I actually think that you're covering a really good section. And I think that also extends to character actions and reactions as well. Because on the one hand, you might want them to be really realistic, where there's some crazy, like, eldritch horror in front of them, where realistically the character would absolutely shit their pants and just, like, curl up into a crying ball, where it's not really going to help, like, any of the situation, and you can't really RP that for the next 7 turns. But at the same time, you don't want to have this, like, absolutely monstrous abomination come out and your character go, "I'll kill you, foul beast." It's like, dude,
You don't belong in this world.
yeah, like, you don't want to have that sort of reaction. You want to be able to, if you have a situation in RP where you go, oh shit, that's going to be a problem, reflect that in your character. Like, if you honestly feel emotion when you are reading particular lines of text, use that to fuel your character interaction. Again, like as Blue said, you know, if there's someone in character who is arguing with you, and you're like, well, that's not bloody true at all, out of character, have your character go in and just be like, well, you know, that's not how that is in character. And, you know, put that in and make it, you know, sound interesting. But, you know, if you do have a situation where your character is facing down some sort of big eldritch horror and it is a heroic moment, have them that they are conflicted and that they're terrified, but they can push through that fear and manage to, like, you know, fight this big eldritch horror and defeat it, but not in a way that makes it look like they're from, you know, a 1990s extremely bad B movie where they shout, "I have the power," and start, like, going crazy, you know?
I think as an exemplar, so as an example of unnatural conversation and just pushing too hard on both rule of cool and being unnaturally focused on talking about lore or what's going on in the story is, I know he's sort of a banished figure, but a lot of what Raptor Blitzwolf would say in RPs or whatever, his character would be like, oh, I'm the guardian of the 7th sun, and I engaged in the 24th battle of the Halo of Gods, and all that kind of stuff. And you wouldn't say that to random people. People don't have any context to that, and it's not how people talked. It's like, that's an example of how, if you want to see something like that, I think he's a good example of too focused on trying to talk about your own faction and all this sort of thing you want to involve, and you're just saying it outright, and it's just no one's that interested in it. It just doesn't come across as a normal, like, person's speech pattern.
For sure.
So it does come through, and you got to be careful of whether or not you're just, like, having a word diarrhea situation of just trying to throw in as much lore about this character in one post or whatever. Instead, just, like, consider whether or not you can have some lapse in a middle of a, like, in between fights or whatever, where your character starts to have a little bit of a breakdown, give an opportunity for another character to go, what's going on? And then you start going, it's nothing. And then it starts slowly opening up over the course of the story. Don't just be like, oh, I had my brothers die before me in the 68th battle of the Somme. it's like it doesn't. It's people don't speak like that. Just try and focus on natural.
And I do want to say, adding on to Blue's point, if you want to do more natural discussions, you can always work with other writers to interrupt the normal flow of posting and work with the GM and just like either do quickfire convo posting between you and the person you're having the in-character discussion with, or you guys can work together and make a like single cooperative post that has a very organic conversation structure.
Absolutely. Like, if anyone says to me in my RPs, like, hey, I know that this is going to be a bit out of turn order, but do you mind if me and so just sort of, like, have some quick fire, like, dialogue between each other? I'm going to go, abso-bloody-lutely, you go for it. Or if they go, or, you know, as Craig said, like, they might just work together and, like, write a cooperative post in Google Docs, and then post it up all as once. And it will be really cool, and I think that adds really nicely to RPs, to be honest, and makes it really cool and realistic at the same time. So, Galactopod asked, given the unrealistic premise of much of everything in Ankh, what would realistically happen? Implausible tech doesn't justify implausible character actions. Well, I wouldn't say that much of the stuff, like everything in Ankh, is unrealistic, considering that, given the actual setting, everything is pretty realistic. So, I guess it makes sense in the actual setting, but just because something's implausible, like, I guess it's pretty much along the lines of, if something is in... Okay, so say you're in an RP, and there are two players that are currently on the surface of a world, and they're having a cool, awesome ground battle. Take Martyrs of the Twin Republics, for example, in the RP server. Me and Lucas are having an awesome battle on the planet of Tanakol, yeah? And we've got divisions moving around, we've got maps and everything, we're having a great time. And Lefty, who is also in the RP, decides, well, actually, it's realistic for my captain in orbit of the fleet to orbitally bombard the entirety of the area and destroy all of the enemy forces. Well, maybe so. But that immediately ends the RP between me and Lucas's ground fight, that we're having a really good time, and it completely invalidates all the maps that we've made, and the 10 posts, 20 posts of progress that we've done, and basically just invalidates it all because some guy wants to be exceedingly anal in being realistic. At that point, I say, no, don't be realistic. Make a reason why they are not orbitally bombarding. In the Martyrs, for example, they're not orbitally bombarding because if they want to, they're going to piss off some of the other factions, and it's probably not going to go down too well for them. There's also the fact that there's going to be massive civilian casualties, infrastructure damage. They're trying to stop insurgents and each other's armies, not destroy the actual planet that they're on. But, like, if you ever get one of those situations where, you know, realistically, you would choose to make an action that would essentially just, like, completely screw over the spirit or the, you know, the premise of the RP, and it's plausible that you would take that choice, and it's realistic to do so, but it ruins the coolness of the RP, make a reason why they don't do it. Because it is really, 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 really dickish to try and force through, like, you know, super duper realism to end an RP in someone else's fun. On the other side of that, if me and Lucas on Tanakol are having a really super duper like epic realistic fight where we literally have the formations and they're fighting, and you know we're having like exact numbers on logistics, and we're having exact numbers of tank losses and ammunition counters, and we're basically reenacting a fight of Wargame Red Dragon but in turns and in this RP. If somebody then turns up and goes, I fly into the, if Lefty then turns up and goes, oh, I fly into the battlefield with like 500 aircraft and, drop all of these carpet bombs and, do all of this stuff that's like really cool, and my guys swing in with these like, massive drop ships and drop down, and they've got all of these superhuman soldiers, and they're, you know, and just like completely rule of course this massive entrance and all of these actions, it's really going to disrupt what we're trying to do in the RP, which is, you know, trying to be ultra realistic and have this really cool nitty gritty details logistic posting, you know, thing. It's basically just know the state of the RP, the tone of the RP, what the RP is going through, and the tone and how the rest of the people in your RP are. Because if I'm RPing with, say, several new people, so for example, Drac here, Brank, Lunara, Galactopod, if I'm RPing with you guys, I'm probably going to be quite reserved at least, because you guys are new. I don't know exactly how you RP. I'm not sure how exactly you're going to respond to various different things. So I'm going to try and play it safe. And I'm going to always like ask you what you think in that. Like, you know, do you guys like my posts? You want me to change anything? If you have any issues, let me know, etc. But if I'm RPing with Crag here and Blue and Schweiger, I will happily let them godmod my own forces if it's necessary for the RP. Example, Midnight on the Tar. I've given Blue Command one of like pretty much like free reign over most of my characters, and also given him one of my factions to use if he needs to make the RP more juicy, because I trust him with what he's doing, and I know that he's not going to pull something out of his ass that's so crazy that it's just going to completely, you know, break the realism of my nation and the consistency of my nation. Oh, okay, never mind, he's going to do so next post. Well, anyway, so it's kind of a thing of know the people that you're RPing with and know the RP. And if you and everyone else in that want to do crazy stuff, that's cool. But don't do anything that's a bit too crazy, whether on realism or rule of cool, that's going to ruin the time for everyone else. I think that's the way to do it. Even if it is implausible for a character not to take a certain decision that they would absolutely in character because of realism or rule of cool or whatever, try to make it so that that doesn't happen purely for the benefit of everyone else. Does that sort of answer that question? Understood. Okay. Rip. Okay, cool. But yeah, well, the factors do make orbital bombardment like not the only realistic option. That's the whole thing. It is just putting a, you know, putting a reason in so that it is not, you're not going to like realistically take that option that's unfortunately going to derail the RP. But yeah, does anyone else have any other questions, or is that that? Are some people typing? I shall let them type. Okay, awesome. Well, in that case, I would say thank you for attending, and I hope that that helped you guys and at least gave you some directions on how to take things. But thank you very much, and I shall catch you soon for the next topic. See you.